Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 6th Global Burns Night, where I'm coming to you live from the Laidlaw Music Centre. It's a night where we come together to explore the life, language and lasting legacy of Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, one of its most influential cultural voices. For you who do not know me already, I'm Robert Fleming. I'm the Director of Development here at the University of St Andrews, and I will take you through our programme this evening. Burns Night has become synonymous with all the things Burns about Scotland. Good food, good company, good poetry, and perhaps a wee dram of whisky. I'm all set with my whisky miniatures and my iron brew, and maybe I'll get some food later on. I extend a very warm welcome to current students, their families, alumni, university staff, and to friends and supporters from all over the globe. Just to give you an idea of timings for your haggis, we will look to address the haggis at around 7:45 p.m, so you'll need to get your haggis on the boil straight away. We expect the event to run until around 8:30 p.m. GMT. Robert Burns was not only a poet, but a storyteller of ordinary lives, a champion of the Scots language, and a sharp observer of society, love, politics, and humanity itself. More than 2 centuries on, his words continue to resonate across classrooms, cultures, and communities around the world, and we're delighted to have you here with us tonight. As part of last year's Global Burns Night, we asked you to tell us your favourite Scottish word, and we shared these throughout the night. This year, we want you to finish this sentence. You know you're in Scotland when... ... So, I'll have to say, you know you're in Scotland when you experience all 4 seasons. If you don't like the weather, just wait 15 minutes. So, please use the Q&A function to say hello. Make sure you tell us where you're joining from, and also share your answers to our question. You know you're in Scotland when... ... And I'll do some shout-outs during our time together. Many of you will know we launched our Making Waves campaign last year, aiming to raise £300 million to support scholarships, endowed chairs and lectureships, our Digital Nexus building as a new home for computer science, and our new college, which is the site of the old Madras College school building. I'm delighted to say our fundraising thermometer is now just about at the halfway mark. So thank you to everyone who has helped us so far with a donation. It's very much appreciated, and we will include a little donation link in the sidebar if you're feeling generous tonight. From research and innovative teaching to student leadership and community engagement, St Andrews has a long tradition of conversations and driving change. Our Making Waves campaign reflects St Andrews' commitment to academic excellence, global responsibility, and the belief that throughout scholarship and collective action, we can make a lasting difference. We're delighted to welcome guests from no less than 32 different countries from around the world tonight, including from the UK, the USA and Canada, throughout Europe, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, Nigeria, Peru, Taiwan, China, Thailand, and India. Wherever you are, you're very welcome. For some of you, maybe this is the first Burns Night you've encountered, while others will be Burns Supper regulars. Here in Scotland, Burns Night traditions are as varied as the people who celebrate them, and tonight we hope to share a little of that richness with you. Whether you're here to learn, to listen, or simply to enjoy, we hope there's something here for everyone. We're very fortunate this evening to welcome crime writer and honorary graduate Val McDermott, as well as avid Burns collector Dr. Bill Zacks. Throughout the evening, you will also hear from staff, students and alumni, alongside key figures from across the university. We're delighted to welcome you to the University of St Andrews Global Burns Night 2026, and hope you enjoy revisiting some of our favourite haunts around St Andrews along the way. We started our evening with the Chancellor's Piper, Joelle Miller, playing Scots Wha Hae at the site of New College, the centrepiece of our Making Waves campaign. New College is a £142 million capital project, and this will be the first new college in nearly 300 years, which will house the School of International Relations and our business school on the old Madras College site. I'm delighted to report that on the 14th of January, just a week or so ago, we were given the green light to start the renovation, and we've already raised more than £50 million towards our goal. Now, Joelle is a fourth-year computer science student and is proudly serving as the Chancellor's Piper this year. Originally from St Andrews, she began her piping journey at Madras College, so fitting that she is back playing on the site this evening. And she's been mastering the bagpipes for the past 9 years. I hope you'll agree that the sound of the bagpipes is the perfect way to kick off the evening. And now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce the Principal and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dame Sally Mapstone.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to join you all at the now very traditional St Andrews Online Burns Supper. And I am here in the library in University House to talk to you about a recent acquisition by the University Library, which is so exciting and full of the spirit that we celebrate at Burns Night. Burns, of course, was himself very interested in Scottish history, and anybody who knows his wonderful poem Scots Wha Hae, which of course deals with the speech of Robert the Bruce to his troops at the celebrated Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, will know that Burns was immensely moved by the stories of Scottish history, and they meant a great deal to him. But of course, when we celebrate Burns Night, we celebrate Burns, but we also celebrate everything we admire that is wonderfully Scottish. And that also brings us to this particular manuscript, which was acquired with the help of some very generous friends, including our very dear friend and frequent performer at our online Burns Night, Dr. William Sachs, helped us to acquire this immensely important historical manuscript, now known as the St Andrews Chronicles, last year. And there are many reasons why it's so exciting to have this manuscript in the University of St Andrews. One of them is that undoubtedly it does have a series of St Andrews University associations. And those associations move us very interestingly between the world of manuscript, which we can see here in this wonderful old manuscript, and the world of early print, which we can see here in this very early 16th century print. And I'm just going to explain a bit about the relationship of these two items. So what are the St Andrews Chronicles? Well, basically, this is a little book of about 230 pages, not much bigger, we would say, than, say, an iPad. It's almost entirely in Latin, and it is a composite of historical works dealing with the history of Scotland and of Britain. The first 38 pages of the manuscript were written in about 1510 by one scribe. And what I'm showing to you here is actually the transition between the writings of the first scribe, which finishes here on page 38 verso, as we would call it, the flip side, and where the second scribe's hand begins. Now, the first 38 pages are a compilation of texts, little texts, king lists, little bits of history and chronicle, dealing with the history of Scotland from the earliest days up until just about the reign of Malcolm and Margaret. So going through from the times of the Picts right through to the 10th, 11th centuries. It's a very interesting compilation. The materials on which the scribe who was copying in 1510 was drawing dated right back to really earlier texts, 12th, 13th century, but this is a particular composite that was put together in this time. And one of the many things that's very interesting about it is that it, for example, it sheds new light on what was known about one of the very interesting events in the Wars of Independence, the struggles between Scotland and England in the Middle Ages, which involved the killing of the English Sheriff of Lanark by William Wallace. And we now know from this chronicle that Wallace did not do that on his own. He had an accomplice with him, and that person is named in this chronicle. So that's a detail that you don't find anywhere else. So after this compilation of king lists, bits of Scottish history, we then come to something that to me is equally interesting, which is that the larger part of this manuscript is a copy in manuscript from print from this particular book. This is a Latin book. It's a chronicle, the history of Greater Britain, to give its translation, a history of Scotland and England written by a Scot, John Mayer, in 1520 and published in Paris for him. And what we have in the second part of our manuscript is a copy in manuscript from a print from Mayer's history. Very interesting that that should happen. This sort of thing did happen in the Middle Ages, which did not move seamlessly from manuscript to print. But it is still unusual to find a manuscript copy of Mayer's printed text. And we think, in fact, that this one is the only one now surviving. And again, what's very interesting here is that this is not a straightforward copy. This manuscript copy copies selectively from Mayer. So it omits the first couple of books, which were dealing with the very early history of Scotland, in my view, because that was already copied and dealt with by the earlier scribe. And it copies selectively from the later books of Mayer to put together something that is complementary to the earlier texts. There's a lot more work to be done on why that was, how that compilation came about, but this is one of the things that makes this particular manuscript a really unique combination. Now, what are the St Andrews associations? Well, we can tell from ownership marks in this manuscript that one of its earliest owners was a Robert Robertoun, who identifies himself as a priest working in Edinburgh. But we think there is some possibility that he is the Robert Robertoun, the same name, who matriculated at our university in 1520. And there are later names in the manuscript even more positively indicating associations with Scots who were at St Andrews. There's the name of David Kemp, and there's very significantly the name of Walter Buchanan, who we can pretty definitely identify as a student in the 1560s. So this manuscript has come home in a way. It's come home to the place where it probably originated. And it also has another link because John Mayer, who was a prolific writer, trained at the University of Paris, but as if you like, an academic, spent much of his career, 2 stints of his career, with us at the University of St Andrews in the 1520s and in the 1530s. So again, that's another reason why someone in St Andrews might well have wanted the celebrated history by John Mayer to be added to this earlier compilation. There are all sorts of fascinating aspects of the relationship of these 2 books. I've already mentioned the very interesting William Wallace connection in the manuscript. Mayer's history has a very celebrated account of the relationship between Wallace and Bruce, and I have it open here on the chapter that deals with that. So that whole sense of the relationship of Scotland to its history, the connections between Scotland and England are very strong in both the original manuscript texts and in Mayer's Chronicle. So there's a lot more work to be done to work out precisely why these two groups of texts were put together, what their readership was, what it signified to people here in St Andrews. But we can now do that work in St Andrews because thanks to the generosity of our supporters and our donors, this manuscript has now come back to its spiritual and literal home, the University of St Andrews. And I hope that you, like me, will want to raise a glass to celebrate the return of the St Andrews Chronicles.
Thank you, Principal. And yes, I'm certainly delighted to raise a little glass of, well, a tin of Iron Brew to welcome the return of St Andrews Chronicles back to St Andrews. Next up, we move to whisky. And we're heading over to Eden Mill Distillery, located on our Eden campus in Garbridge, to meet Ewan Kinnenmouth, whisky expert and brand homes manager. Eden Mill is currently an official partner of Saints Golf, our elite golf team, and a collaboration rooted in shared values of excellence, innovation, and the rich heritage of St Andrews.
Hi, my name is Ewan Kinninmouth and I'm the brand homes manager here at Eden Mill St Andrews. Welcome along to your Burns Night tasting. I'm delighted to introduce some Eden Mill whiskies to you all, but firstly let me tell you a little bit about Eden Mill St Andrews. We are a new distillery here just outside St Andrews on the banks of the Eden estuary. We've been distilling on this site since 2014. As part of the St Andrews University Eden campus, the campus in Guardbridge geared towards sustainability. We have just opened our brand new distillery and I'm going to share some of our whiskies with you. Now, starting off with our Guardbridge, an aptly named blended malt Scotch whisky. This is a beautiful whisky that balances whiskies from the lowlands, whiskies from the highlands, and one of those lowland whiskies are our very own single malt in there. It's a beautiful creamy light whisky, perfect for an opener to your evening, perfect for the starter, or even if you want to make it into a nice little cocktail as well. So you get this beautiful notes of creamy vanilla, a slight bit of cereal coming through, and a little bit of shortbread as well. So why do we call it the Guardbridge? Now, the Guardbridge is where this village was named after. It is the bridge that was built in 1410 to allow safe passage for pilgrims and students alike into the historic town of St Andrews over the River Eden. So we thought it was a perfect whisky to showcase our beautiful little village here just on the outskirts of St Andrews, and a real mark to the history. When you look at the bottle itself, it actually shows the flow of the River Eden through Fife out into the Eden estuary right here at St Andrews University Eden campus. Like I said, a perfect whisky to start the evening or even for an after dinner cocktail. Very nice light whisky. So moving on to our very own single malt. Like I said earlier, Eden Mill started distilling here in 2014, only on a very small scale. So all our single malt Scotch whisky is very limited. The bourbon cask single malt that I have here is probably the best flagship that we have to describe the spirit of St Andrews. It is a beautifully light whisky that we mature exclusively in first fill bourbon casks. Now this one's been maturing for about 6.5 years. It picks up those beautiful vanilla notes from the bourbon casks with a little bit of spicy wood coming through and a nice little bit of sweetness, almost a toffee-like character to it. This one is a perfectly light whisky to pair with your main course this evening. You've got your haggis, neeps and tatties. You don't want something too powerful or too rich to go with that, just something very light and very easy drinking. And I think our bourbon cask single malt Scotch whisky is a perfect accompaniment to your Burns supper, Slange. Before I move on to our last whisky, telling a little bit about our connection to St Andrews and a little bit about the man himself, Burns, who had a deep, rich connection to the whisky industry itself. He wrote various poems and ballads about our famous drink and worked in the industry. On the other side of the industry, on the tax side of the industry, as an excise man, worked down in Ayrshire. He did love a drink, and going by what he's written about tax and excise men, I don't think he liked his job very much as well. In the poem A Scotch Drink, he talks about mainly attacking the excise men, so didn't really have much love for that part of his life. He quite clearly loved the dram, and in Scotland we've been enjoying this drink for nearly 1,000 years now. We are a new boy on the scene, but very much rich, deep roots in St Andrews and in Scotch whisky history. St Andrews didn't have a whisky producer in the area for 150 years until Eden Mill came along in 2014. So the first single malt that we made was the first whisky to be made in the St Andrews area for over 150 years. So we're delighted to bring some of that history and that tradition full circle back to St Andrews. Which leads me on to our last whisky. Now, our last whisky has been left till last because I think it's a great one as a dessert dram, a great one to finish the evening on. Very lightly peated, so mostly we will use unpeated barley, that's pale barley, whereas peated barley, you get a lot more of that smoky character through, and that's because they dry the peat, the traditional way of using peat to fire the kiln. So you get all these phenolic flavours through the barley. Now, not traditional for a lowland distillery like us to be making peated whisky. You'll usually find it in the Highlands and the West Coast islands. But we introduced a small amount of peated barley into our production back in 2015. That is where this whisky comes from. It is a combination of unpeated and peated barley, so not hugely smoky, just a light little smoky character. It's been matured in a combination of bourbon casks and sherry casks, so you get a nice little bit of vanilla sweetness like our previous dram, but also a nice little bit of richness, almost like your granny's Christmas cake. Dates, raisins, spices in there. Then you get that smoky character. Now, the best way to describe this is probably the words of our head distiller, Scott Ferguson. Scott has been involved with Eden Mill since 2012, making all our lovely gins and whiskies that we produce. But he is an alumni from St Andrews University, and he reminisces about campfires down on the castle sands, down on the beach. And this is what this whisky reminds him of. It's that very light, salty, smoky character, almost like a little bit of wood burning coming through on the nose of the whisky. We've added an extra layer to this whisky by finishing it in ex-champagne cognac casks. So you get a nice little bit of fruitiness. So it starts off smoky, slightly salty, very coastal, and then you get these lovely flavours of dried apricots right at the end. Slange. Like I said, a perfect whisky to round off the evening. Once you've had your starter, your main, you've maybe had a little bit of Chronicle, and then you're just looking for a nice whisky full of flavour and full of character to finish off the night, and that is the perfect whisky to do that with. Hope you've enjoyed hearing all about Eden Mill, me introducing some of our whiskies to you. If you want to find out more about Eden Mill, you can visit our website, edenmill.com. Or if you're in St Andrews, you can even come visit us at our brand new distillery and visitor centre. But for now, enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy your haggis, and maybe enjoy a few drams as well. Slán ba.
Thank you very much, Ewan, for that great insight. And I'm delighted I've got some of your recommendations here to enjoy. I'll maybe wait till later. First time we did this back in 2021, I might have had a little whiskey after each broadcast, and it didn't work so well for me at the end. Now, we're going to move on to a cappella group, the Alleycats. They are an award-winning student a cappella group known for their contemporary performances, mashups, and distinctive blend of male and female voices.
Oh, the summertime is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go? And we'll all go together to pluck wild mountain thyme all around the blooming heather. Will you go?
I will build, my love, a tower by yon pure crystal fountain, and on it I will build all the flowers of the mountain. Will you go?
the summer time is coming, and the trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the blooming heather. Will you go, lassie, go?
It is now my great pleasure to welcome Keith McLaren, who will perform Burns' Tam o' Shanter in an iconic St Andrews location. Keith studied economics at the University of St Andrews from 1980 to 1984. He followed a varied career ranging from ski instructing, finance and various business ventures, and then returning to St Andrews 10 years ago. He now works as a tour guide, enjoys playing golf, and writes the Kilted Caddy blog, combining a love of storytelling with a deep affection for the town.
When Chapman Billies leave the street and drouthy neighbours meet, as market days are wearing late and folk begin to tack the gate, while we sit boozing at the nappy, getting foo and unca-happy, we think now on the lang Scots miles, the mosses waters, slaps and stiles that lie between us and our hame, where sits our sulky, sullen dame, gathering her brows like gathering storm, nursing her wrath to keep it warm. This truth found honest Tam o' Shanter, as he frae Ayr in night did canter. Old Ayr, where ne'er a town surpasses for honest men and bonny lasses. Ah, Tam, hadst thou but been sae wise as ta'en thy ain wife Kate's advice, she told thee weel thou was a skellum, a blethering, blustering, drunken blellum, that from November till October, a market day thou was nae sober. The ilka melder with the miller, thou sat as long as thou had siller, that every nag was cad a shoe on, the smith and thee got roaring foo on, that at the Lord's house, even on Sunday, thou drank with Kirkton Jean till Monday. She prophesied that late or soon thou would be found deep drooned in Doon, or catch wi' warlocks in the murk by Alloway's old haunted kirk. Ah, gentle dames, it gars me greet to think how many counsels sweet, how many lengthened sage advices the husband frae the wife despises. But to our tale, a market night Tam had got planted unco right, fast by an ingle bleezing finely, with reaming swats that drank divinely, and at his elbow Suitor Johnny, his ancient trusty drouthy crony. Tam lived him like a very brither. They had been fou for weeks together. The night drave on with sangs and clatter, and aye the ale was growing better. The landlady and Tam grew gracious, with secret favour sweet and precious. The suitor told his queeriest stories, the landlord's laugh was ready chorus. The storm without might rear and rustle, Tam didn't he mind the storm a whistle. Care, mad to see a man sae happy, he drooned himself amang the nappy. As bees flew hame with lades of treasure, the minutes wing their way with pleasure. Kings may be blessed, but Tam was glorious, o'er the ills of life victorious. But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snow falls on the river, a moment's white and melts forever, or like the borealis race that flit ere you can point their place, or like the rainbow's lovely form a vanishing amidst the storm. Nay man can tether time or tide, the hour approaches Tam maun ride, that hour, o night's black arch the keystane, that dreary hour Tam mounts his beast in, and sick a night he taks the roadin, and ne'er poor sinner was abroadin. The wind blew as was blan his last, the rattling showers rose on the blast, the speedy gleams the darkness swallowed, loud, deep and lang the thunder bellowed. That night a child might understand, the deil had business on his hand. Well mounted on his grey mare Meg, better never lifted leg, Tam skelpit on through dub and mire, despising wind and rain and fire, whilst holding fast his gidboo bonnet, whilst crooning over some old Scots sonnet, whilst glowering round with prudent cares, lest bogles catch him unawares. Kirkalloway was drawing nigh, where guests and hoolits nightly cry. By this time he was across the ford, where in the snaw the chaplain smoored, and past the birks and Meiklestown, where drunken Charlie Breckneck's bane, and through the whins and by the cairn, where hunters found the murdered bairn, and near the thorn aboon the well, where Mungo's mither hunged herself. Before him Doon pours all his floods, the doubling storms roar through the woods, the lightnings flash from pole to pole, near and more near the thunders roll, whilst, glimmering through the groaning trees, Kirkalloway seemed in a blaze, though ilka bore the beams were glancing, and loud resounded mirth and dancing. Inspiring bold John Barleycorn, what dangers thou can make us scorn. With Tippany we fear no evil, with Ushkaba we'll face the devil. The swat sae reamed in Tammy's noddle, fair play, he carney deals a bottle, but Maggie stood right sae astonished, till by the heel and hand admonished, she ventured forward on the light, and wow, Tam saw an uncouth sight. Warlocks and witches in a dance, nae cotillion Brent knew from France, but hornpipes, jigstraws, pays and reels put life and metal in their heels. A winning bunker in the east, there sat old Nick in shape o' beast, a tousey tyke black, grim and large. To gie them music was his charge. He screwed the pipes and girt them skirl, till roof and rafters added dirl. Coffins stood round like open presses, that showed the deed in their last dresses, and by some devilish cantrip slight, each in its cold hand held a light, by which heroic Tam was able to note upon the hilly table a murderer's banes in gibbet airns, twa span lang Wigan christened bairns, a thief new cutted for a rape, with his last gab his gad did gape, 5 tomahawks with blood red rusted, 5 scimitars with murder crusted, a garter which a babe had strangled, a knife a father's throat had mangled, whom his ain son o' life bereft, the grey hairs yet stuck to the heft, with mair, o horrible and awful, which even to name would be unlawful. As Tam glowered, amazed and curious, the mirth and fun grew fast and furious, the piper loud and louder blew, the dancers quick and quicker flew, they reeled, they set, they crossed, they clicked, till ilka carlin swat and reekit, and coosed her duddies to the work, and linkit at it in her sark. Now Tam, oh Tam, had they been queens, a plump and strapping in their teens, their sarks instead of creashy flannin, been snow white 1700 linen, the breeks of mine, my only pair, the ants with plush a gid blue hair, I would have given them off my hurdies for a blink of the bonny birdies. But withered beldams old and droll, rigwoody hags would spin a full loupin and flinging on a crummock. I wonder didn't they turn their stomach. But Tam kenned what was what fu brawly. There was a winsome wench in Whalley that night, enlisted in the corps, lang after kenned on Carrick shore. For mony a beast to dead she shot, and perished mony a bonny boat, and shook both meikle corn and bear, and kept the countryside in fear. Her cutty sark, o Paisley harn, that while a lassie she had worn, in longitude though fairly scanty, it was her best, and she was vaunty. A little kenned thy reverend granny, that sark she coughed for her wee nanny, with twa pund Scots it was her riches, would ever have graced a dance of witches. But here my muse her wing maun cower, sic flights are far beyond her power, to sing how Nanny lap and flang a supple jad she was and strang, and how Tam looked like ane bewitched, and thought is very een enriched. Even Satan glowered and fish fu fain, and hotched and blew with micht and men, till first they keep her, signed to nither, tamped into his reason a together, and roars out, "Well done, Cutty Sark!" And in an instant all was dark, and scarcely had he Maggie rallied, when out the hellish legion sallied, as bees buzz out with angry fife, and hundred herds assailed their bike as open pussy's mortal foes, when pops she starts before their nose, as eager runs the market crowd, when "Catch the thief" resounds aloud. So Maggie runs, the witches follow, with money and eldritch screech and hollow. O Tam, they'll get thy farin. In hell they'll roast thee like a heron. In vain thy Kate awaits thy coming. Kate soon will be a woeful woman. Now do thy speedy utmost, Meg, and win the keystone of the brig. Thereat thou thy tail may toss, a running stream they darn they cross. But ere the keystone she could make, the fiend to tail she had to shake. For Nanny, far before the rest, hard upon noble Maggie pressed, and flew at Tam with furious ettle. But little was she Maggie's mettle. A spring brought off her master's hail, and left behind her ain grey tail. The carlin clocked her by the rump, and left poor Maggie scarce a stump. Now, wha this tale of truth shall read, ilk man or mother son take heed, whether to drink you are inclined, or Cutty Sarks run in your mind. Think you may buy the joys o'er dear. Remember Tam O'Shanter's mare.
That was Keith McLaren reciting Tam O'Shanter. Absolutely brilliant performance. Thank you so much, Keith. Now we've got time for some shout outs, and I said at the start that we're interested to hear your answers to the question, you know you're in Scotland when? And Peter Goldthorpe first to come in with, you know you're in Scotland when small becomes we and yes becomes I. Jessica Volks in Denver, you know you're in Scotland when you've lost something, you're lost in something called har. Avril Newton, you know you're in Scotland when the sky gets bigger and the headache lifts. That's nice. Andrew Wallard, I know I'm in Scotland when my heart beats faster and there are tears in my eyes and I hear the skirl of the pipes. Richard Dugdale says, I know I'm in Scotland when slightly rudely awoken by the jolt of shunting when the Caledonian sleeper train is being portioned apart in Edinburgh at 2 a.m. Welcome to Scotland. Kylie Murray has got a couple of suggestions. When you can easily access Iron Brew 1901, Nectar of the Gods. And you know you're in Scotland when you can attend a ceilidh that gies at laldy and bruises your limbs, always a sign of a great ceilidh in my St Andrews years. Hello from Andrea and Katie, all the way from Strathkinnis. You know you're in Scotland when you get lost in the three streets, or when you're, of St Andrews that is, and or when you're being battered by the sea air in the middle of winter, much like today. Jim Henderson says it's when you're looking at the scenery. And Michael Day, you know you're in Scotland when you eat bridie and chips. Rebecca and Neil in Adrich, Nottingham, write in to say, you know you're in Scotland when the midges start to bite. Always good for tourism, that one. Alex Walmsley, you know you're in Scotland when there's a fudge donut on the menu. And finally, Charlotte Booth says, a bit of a silly one, but you know you're in Scotland when the cheddar cheese is orange and macaroni and lasagna are a type of pie. I do approve. So, as we celebrate Scotland's rich cultural heritage, we're pleased to be joined by student dance group Highland Fusion. Most of you will recognise the location as St Sylvester's Quadrangle, and this group brings together the tradition and innovation, blending the strength and precision of Highland dance with contemporary styles. In the spirit of Robert Burns, who championed both respect for tradition and creative expression, Highland Fusion offers a modern interpretation of Scottish culture, rooted in history, yet alive to the present. Please join me in welcoming Highland Fusion. Thank you very much to Highland Fusion for joining us tonight. We'll now welcome Lucy Ribchester, who will perform Address to a Haggis. After graduating from the University of St Andrews in 2004, Lucy went on to complete a Masters in Shakespeare Studies at King's College London and Shakespeare's Globe, before training on the Royal Court's Young Writers Programme. Lucy is an acclaimed author who has written 5 novels, including thrillers under the pen name L. Connell. And her most recent book, Murder Ballad, was published in May 2025. Lucy also works as a Royal Literary Fund Fellow at the University of Edinburgh. Following the traditional Address to a Haggis, we will hear again from the Chancellor's Piper, Joelle Miller, as she performs A Man's a Man for A' That, the song traditionally used to pipe in the haggis at a Burns supper.
Fair fa, your honest sonsy face, great chieftain o' the puddin' race. Aboon them a' ye tak your place, painch, tripe or therm, and Wales thee worthy o' a grace as lang's my arm. The groaning trencher there ye fill, your hardies like a distant hill, your pin would help to mend a mill in time o' need, while through your pores the dews distill like amber bead. His knife see rustic labour dicht, and cut ye up wi' ready slicht, trenching your gushing entrails bricht like ony ditch. And then, oh, what a glorious sicht, warm, reeking, rich. Then, horn for horn, they stretch and strive, deal tack the hindmost on they drive, till all their wheels swell, kites alive are bent like drums. Then, old Goodman mayst lick to arrive, bethank it hums. Is there that o'er his French ragout, or olio would staw a sou, or fricassee would mak her spew wi' perfect sconner, looks down wi' sneering, scornfu' view on sic a dinner. Poor devil, see him o'er his trash, as feckless as a withered rash, his spindle shank a good whiplash, his neave a knit. through bloody flood or field to dash, oh, how unfit! But mark the rustic, Haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his wally knee a blade, he'll mak it whistle, and legs and arms and heads will sned like taps o' thistle. Ye powers, wha mak mankind your care, and dish them out their bill of fare, Old Scotland wants nae skinking ware that joups in luggies. But if you wish her grateful prayer, gie her a haggis.
So, as we prepare to tuck into our haggis, and I've got my haggis neeps and tatties here, I will recite the traditional Selkirk grace. Some hae meat and canna eat, and some would eat that want it. But we hae meat and we can eat, so let the Lord be thankit. As we gather to honour Scotland's enduring literary heritage, it is fitting that we are joined by a writer who embodies its modern voice. Val McDermid is one of Scotland's most distinguished contemporary authors, internationally renowned for her contribution to crime fiction and for shaping what is often described as tartan noir. Raised in Fife, she worked as a journalist for 15 years, finishing up as the Northern Bureau Chief of a Sunday tabloid newspaper. Beyond fiction, she has written a children's book, a graphic novel, a personal reflection on winter, and Queen Macbeth, a historical novella. Several of her books have been adapted for radio and TV, most recently the Karen Pirie Cold Case novels. And like Burns, her work is rooted in place, alive to social justice, and unafraid to speak plainly and powerfully about the human condition. The recipient of 8 honorary doctorates, including one from St Andrews for her outstanding contributions to writing and culture, we are delighted to welcome Val to our Burns Night celebrations as she delivers the immortal memory.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to share my passion for the work of Robert Burns. No other poet inspires so much affection, nor so diverse a fan club. There will be Burns suppers this month, from Beijing to Buenos Aires, from Reykjavik to Rothera Research Station in Antarctica. Of course, there are learned societies who meet to discuss the work of T.S. Eliot or William Wordsworth or Chaucer. But can you really imagine their meetings being an occasion for jollity and delight? Can you picture them singing? Or having a wee titter at the body bits in Milton's Paradise Lost? There's a reason why Burns has such a wide range of devotees. His verse is rooted in the experiences of ordinary men and women. We all understand desire and its consequences. We recognise both the comedy and the thrill of the chase in Tam Shanter. We've all experienced loss and failure. We've all chafed at the unfairness of the world. We've all raged at the hypocrisy of the Holy Willies, particularly the ones in Westminster and Washington, D.C. Burns shares all of those aspects of life with us, often through an unflinching lens. He had that mixed blessing he wished for all of us. O wad some power the gift he gie us, to see yourselves as others see us. Nor does he shy away from showing himself in a less than flattering light. There's a story told about Rabbie and his brother Gilbert watching the hens and the cockerel scratching about. One of the hens gives the cockerel the come hither, and he starts to strut across the yard to do his duty. Just then, one of the bairns comes out and scatters a handful of chicken feed in the yard. The cockerel stops in his tracks and starts pecking at the seed, and Rabbie turns to Gilbert and says, I pray that I will never be so hungry as that. People like my father, a working class man who left school at 14, saw his own worldview in the words of Robert Burns. The opening stanzas of A Man's a Man for All That were words that shaped his personal politics, and that in turn shaped me. It's there for honest poverty that hangs his heed and all that. The coward slave, we pass him by, we dare be pair for all that. For all that and all that, our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man is the gowd for all that. It's not surprising that these were the words sung at the opening of the Scottish Parliament. They're words that should be carved on the heart of every elected politician here and abroad. I learned from Burns via my father that I was as good as anyone else, that I need call no man my master, or woman either, come to that. That's a pretty good principle to live by, and it stood me in good stead. When I arrived among the dreaming spires of Oxford, I had no chip on my shoulder. I didn't cringe at the idea of being somewhere I had no right to be. I believed I was there because I deserved to be, and because that was my attitude, I was judged on my achievements, not my background. And so once a year, I welcome the chance to celebrate the poet whose influence made possible the life I enjoy now. We'll all eat and drink, we'll sing and laugh, and that's because Burns is one of us. Although Burns clearly had a working man's appetite for his food, you only have to listen to the address to the Haggis to understand that, it paled to insignificance next to his appetite for the lassies, and I sometimes wonder if that's why he became a poet. Readers often ask writers why they choose to write in one particular form rather than another. Why become a poet rather than a dramatist? Why write novels when you could write military history? Sometimes the decision is historic. Shakespeare couldn't have written novels, for example, because the novel hadn't been invented yet. But all other things being equal, we each have our own reasons for writing what we do. I sometimes wonder whether Burns became a poet rather than an essayist or an historian or a dramatist, because a poem is a great calling card when you want to win someone's favours. But while it's one thing to get a boost to your attractiveness quotient just by being a writer, the poets have one great advantage. Some novelists take years to finish a book. By that time, the lassie in question could be a distant memory, whisked off into the sunset by, yes, you've got it, a poet, because it doesn't take long to knock out a quick love lyric dedicated to the object of your attention. Sadly for me, I didn't figure that out in time. But Burns did have lessons for me as a writer. He approached the craft of verse in the way that any artisan approaches their work. A lot of people show early talent in their chosen field, but most of them fall by the wayside. A handful of them hone their talents and develop their skills to the point where they tower above the opposition, and that's what he did. Burns started out writing adolescent wee poems in standard English, but as he grew in confidence he began to trust his own voice, writing in gid-braid Scots, and refining the verse form that's now known as the Burns stanza, which we hear tonight in the address to the Haggis. And of course, like all great artists, he borrowed from the best of what had gone before. He collected traditional songs and polished them into gems that we know now, writing lyrics to tunes that were already familiar. The quality of his skill is obvious in the fact that Auld Lang Syne is probably the best known song in the world. For some people, Should Auld Acquaintance Be Forgot is the nearest they come to speaking English. Mind you, you could say the same about some folk fae Fife, especially around Cowdenbeath. But there is so much more to Burns than that handful of verses most people are familiar with. If we revealed his story on Facebook today, folk would call it fake news. Imagine a ploughman with no proper schooling turning out reams of poetry right across the spectrum. Passionate love poems, social satire, comedy, politics, haggis, attacks on hypocrisy, bawdy songs about sexual adventures, not to mention subversive sideways swipes at political and ecclesiastical elites, or rescuing dozens of traditional songs from oblivion. Surely it would have to be some sort of money-making scam, or the creation of a fake identity to hide some well-known and well-established literary figure. But there was nothing fake about Burns. It would be a mistake not to examine his more serious side when considering his place in our literary canon. William Wordsworth, a near contemporary of Burns, and also a radical poet who supported the French Revolution in his verse, once said of Milton, "Thou shouldst be living at this hour, England hath need of thee." I'd like to paraphrase that and say, Burns, thou shouldst be living at this hour, Scotland hath need of thee. We need a strong voice to tell truth to power, to call out the hypocrites and the crooks, to strip away the curtain and show us the truth. Apart from anything else, Burns the exciseman would have made short work of Nadim Zahawi's tax returns. But I don't think he'd be drawn to the politics of today. I do think he might find his home on the stage as a stand-up comic. Nobody can deny that Scottish comedy is world-renowned, robust, dry, dark, and above all, dedicated to taking lumps out of anybody who gets above themselves. We joke about death, about tragedy, about pain. Scottish comedy reveals a warm humour born of a cold climate, a country that's known its fair share of tragedy and hard times, a place where no one is above being taken down a peg or two, where pretentiousness is always held up to ridicule, and where the ability to laugh at yourself and your misfortunes is vital. We poke fun at ourselves before anybody else can get their kicks in. One of the strongest identifying features of our crime fiction, so-called tartan noir, is black humour in the face of adversity and dead bodies. Burns understood this. He was the eldest of 7 children of a poor farmer, and his early years were hallmarked by the kind of poverty and hard work that would have been intolerable were it not for a strong sense of humour. But thankfully for us, Warren's father was self-educated and well-read, and he made sure his son got a decent education for the time, an education that astonishingly included history, reading, geography, Latin, French, mathematics, and the odd dram. But in spite of the hardships and the homework, Burns never got bitter, he just got better. Many of his funniest poems poke fun at Scotland and the Scottish psyche. Everywhere he saw pomposity or slyness, Burns was all over it. But he didn't rant or preach. He made fools of the guilty. Holy Willie's Prayer, for example, is a brilliant takedown of religious hypocrisy and self-serving dishonesty. We can't help grinning as Burns demonstrates how Willie deserves neither respect nor divine favours, and he does it all in perfect rhyme and scansion. Just think about that for a minute. Now, given how much time and interest Burns showed in lassies, it's hardly surprising that a lot of his humour is directed towards the relationships between the sexes, just like so much contemporary stand-up. At the heart of the brilliant Tam Shanter is the satire of a good-for-nothing husband and a frustrated wife at the end of her tether. As well as these longer poems, what you might call observational comedy that the likes of Billy Connolly, Susie McCabe or Elaine C. Smith provide, we have techniques that can all be found in work written over 200 years ago in a lowly farmer's cottage in Alloway by Robert Burns, perhaps Scotland's first celebrity comedian. He was a master of the poetic equivalent of the one-liner, the smart-arse remark whose sting sometimes takes a few minutes for the person who's been stung to get it. Take this, for example, which could still be sent to Fife Council. I'm now arrived, thanks to the gods, through pathways rough and muddy, a certain sign that Mackin roads is no this people's study. Although I'm no with scripture crammed, I'm sure the Bible says that heedless sinners shall be damned unless they mend their ways. Nevertheless, in spite of the potholes, I like to think that Burns would have found a natural home here in Fife. He'd have found good companions in the pubs, people to drink and laugh with, and certainly a few to laugh at, whether they liked it or not. He would have enjoyed sparring with the great minds of the university staff, from professors to porters. He'd have been a chiel among us, tacking notes, proving yet again that you can't quite trust writers. Of course, if he was around now, he'd never be off social media. He'd be the king of the selfie, batting his beautiful long eyelashes at us endlessly. He'd post his poems on Facebook and fill Instagram with the photographs of mice and lice and bonny banks and braes. I'm a celebrity, get me out of here would be a piece of cake for a ploughman accustomed to being out in all Scottish weathers. And of course he'd be on the traitors, though given his proclivities he'd struggle with being a faithful. In spite of his tragically early death, Burns' output was prodigious, and he did reach the very pinnacle of his chosen art. He got to strut his stuff in Edinburgh. But I'm puzzled that he didn't make it as far as the East Neuk. It would seem in many ways to be his natural habitat. As I'm sure you all know, this part of Scotland has always had a vigorous trade with the Low Countries, and I recently discovered that in Dutch, the word nuke means what in polite society I'd have to call hoch magandi. It's almost certainly the derivation of the word nookie, so I can't help feeling that had Rabbie ventured further east, he'd have felt right home here in St Andrews. Before I formally propose the toast to his immortal memory, I'd like to mention an important anniversary. The first recorded Burns supper took place in 1801, a mere 5 years after his death. But it was 1876 before a woman was ever allowed to open her mouth at a Burns night, and even then it was only to sing. The first recorded instance of a woman making a speech at a Burns supper was 106 years ago, in 1920. I did consider speaking for 106 years to make up for that, but instead I'll just settle for asking you to raise your glasses to toast the immortal memory of Robert Burns. to Robert Burns.
Slange Val. Now, thank you to our audience for getting in touch tonight. More shout-outs from Moira from the Loire Valley in France. You know you're in Scotland when you're being eaten alive by the midges. Common theme emerging. Ian Pettigrew, you know you're in Scotland when you've got your bagpipes out. Kristen Meikle, you know you're in Scotland when you know how to spell whisky. Well, the Scottish version without the E and the Irish version with. Hello to all. This is Peter and Nicole from The Hague. You know you're in Scotland when we arrive with our Labrador Polo at his favourite Polo Ralph Lauren store and he is warmly welcomed inside. An anonymous listener, you know you're in Scotland when you find yourself sleeping in a woolly jumper and bobble hat to keep warm. Somebody, also anonymous, but joining us all the way from Mexico, you know you're in Scotland when there are golf courses all around. And hello to Rod and Kathy Boyer from Pennsylvania, USA. You know you're in Scotland when the first big ad you see on the Edinburgh airport wall features a big bottle of famous grouse. And finally, Shirley Annandale, you know you're in Scotland when the weather's dreich. Can't do much about that, I'm afraid. Next this evening, we will hear Emma Montgomery, who will be playing the Border Pipes, filmed at this wonderful Laidlaw Music Centre. Emma studied philosophy here at the university and graduated last year. She's a Scottish traditional musician, learning the Highland bagpipes from the age of 11 and competing in pipe band championships until 16 as pipe sergeant. After winning the 2019 World Pipe Championships in her grade, she moved to focus on the Border Pipes, a bellows-blown relative of the Highland pipes and accordion. Thank you very much for that performance, Emma. Next up, we are delighted to welcome back Dr. Bill Zacks. Bill is an academic, a book collector based in Edinburgh, and although originally from the US. He is an author, scholar, a collector and curator, and a great friend to the university. Bill is one of the foremost collectors of Robert Burns, including a famous copy of the 1786 Kilmarnock edition, which he has generously loaned to the university for display and studying, highlighting its historical importance. As we have heard earlier from the principal, he was also instrumental in helping the university acquire the rare historical manuscript now called the St Andrews Chronicles. Tonight, we're delighted to hear from Bill about the hunt to find the lost portrait of Robert Burns, painted by Scotland's greatest artist, Sir Henry Raeburn, that has been lost for over 220 years. This painting has just today gone on display at the National Gallery on the Mound in Edinburgh, hanging face to face with the original portrait by Alexander Naismith for the first time in over 200 years since they were in Raeburn's Edinburgh studio.
Robert Burns. He is a genius, and it's no accident that that genius has endured for over 200 years. To this day, Henry Raeburn remains Scotland's greatest portrait painter. The greatest Scottish figure painted by the greatest Scottish painter. I applied to Edinburgh University for a one-year master's degree course. That was in 1983, the age of 22. I'm still here 42 years later. Burns really, in the last several years, has become at the center of both what I read, what I write, what I hope to write, and what I collect. In circles of Raeburn scholars and Burns scholars, it was well known that there was a lost Raeburn painting. It had not been seen for over 220 years. When I started to collect Burns in a serious way, I was more interested in the little scraps, the little tidbits, what might be called Burnsiana. And about 23 or 4 years ago, I was offered a letter that was written by a man called Alexander Cunningham, one of Burns' closest friends at the time. The letter was written in April of 1803. Burns, of course, had died in 1796. And what captivated me, what struck me about this letter, was that it mentioned the original portrait by Naismith. This Alexander Cunningham was at that time the owner of that painting. Now that painting, of course, is in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery and much viewed and much praised as a work of art. But the letter was written to the publishers Thomas Caddell and Davies, who had been involved in the publication of the London edition of Burns' poems. The key thing about this letter was that it mentioned Henry Raeburn as the person Cunningham thought best to make a new portrait of Burns. And it was time, he felt, for a fresh view, a fresh vision of Burns. Cunningham recommends his friend, the local artist whose reputation was growing, Henry Raeburn. He paints in a style that is dynamic, that is free-flowing, that is something different from what had come before. This letter in my collection confirmed the circumstances around the origin of the making of that painting. Between April and November 1803, Raeburn worked on this portrait at his studio in Edinburgh in York Place. When the portrait was finished, he wrote to Caddell and Davies to say that the work was done, the bard was finished, and that it was time to ship him down to London. In the spring of 2025, there was a painting coming up in a sale in Wimbledon, just outside of London. A painting that was described as Robert Burns in the manner of Rayburn. Now, this rather surprised me to get this information. So on a Friday night, I took a closer look, and I don't pretend to be a judge, particularly from an image on a phone, but I thought this looked impressive. Now, some people, when they find something in an auction, they keep quiet. They go underground and not let anybody know what they're after. I needed help. I asked two friends who are far more expert in the works of Henry Rayburn for an opinion. Their opinion was positive. While the painting by Rayburn of Burns had never been seen, what we did know of was the engraving after the painting. Certain characteristics of the engraving connect closely with the portrait. We could have more confidence that the painting that had come up in that out-of-the-way auction room in Wimbledon might actually be the one we'd been looking for. Didn't want the painting to get in the hands of someone who might, if it were the lost Rayburn, hold Scotland, hold the National Galleries, hold the nation to ransom. So I took this mission quite seriously and was determined, feeling confident but not absolutely certain that this could be the painting we'd been looking for so long. It was a nerve-wracking morning when the auction was to take place.
You can bid. Are we on it?
The bidding began. I was on the phone. The price quickly rose from the £300 to £500 estimate. I continued bidding, and bidding.
Bid, please.
And it went back and forth, but I marched on, bidding, and bidding further.
Please bid.
I was determined to bring this painting, this treasure, this image of the national bard back home to Scotland.
Very once, very twice, very 3 times.
Congratulations. Thank you, Charlotte. Oh.
When the hammer went down, I felt such a sense of joy. It was an intense 8 or 9 minutes of bidding. Work began to remove the darkened varnish that had been there for many years and to restore a few points of damage that had happened in this more than 2-century life of this canvas. I could not wait any longer. I got on a train and went down to London to meet the painting at last. It was a spectacular moment beyond words. Finally, to see the bard himself. That is a moment I will never forget. Once the restoration was done, the painting was shipped to Edinburgh. We called in Duncan Thompson, the great expert in Rayburn, the former keeper of the Scottish Portrait Gallery. Duncan came into the room, looked at the painting, and there was this unforgettable moment of silence.
This is more than my expectations. one gets that feeling that perhaps Rayburn had seen Burns in the street, and although it is a copy, he also had a memory of the man in his mind, in his imagination. One can almost hear the man speaking. It's such an insight into his personality. Of course, Rayburn had such a grasp of personality. That's the principal feature of his portraits in a way. I mean, we talk about the handling and the colour and so on, and the sense of light, which is very important in Rayburn's paintings. But the way he was able to grasp the meaning of the person he was painting, the inner person, the personality, that was Rayburn's great gift. And his subjects look so believable, so modern in a sense, so contemporary. Pure Rayburn in so many ways. It's wonderful how he's simplified the trees here, actually. The Naismith trees are not like that at all, actually. He's turned the trees into pure Rayburn. I can see his, what I would call handwriting. You know, you can recognise people by their handwriting. Or one can spot a Rayburn brush in this cravat here, which is actually improved what Naismith did. He's tidied up Naismith's collar, and he's taken the waistcoat more convincingly round the back of the neck. But it's this wonderful deft mark that Rayburn makes. It's all there, Bill. It's all there. Tremendous, tremendous.
I see myself as really the midwife for this painting. I've found it and acquired it, and now I want to continue that process in a wider way of sharing this work with everyone who wants to see it. My plan, my dream, is for the painting to go on display in Edinburgh at the National Gallery of Scotland, and then in Alloway at the Burns Birthplace Museum for all to see.
Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing your story of the lost portrait of Robert Burns. And please, if you are in the Edinburgh area, do make a visit to the National Galleries to see it for yourself. We now have some time for some final shout-outs before we have to part ways. And so, from Jonathan Newman, you know you're in Scotland when you use a niblick and people know what you're doing. From Danny in St Andrews, you know you're in Scotland when you have a square sausage and a tatty scone in a roll for your breakfast. An anonymous viewer, you know you're in Scotland when folks say, "Lang may your lum reek," and folks know what you're talking about. Mark in London says, you know you're in Scotland when you breathe some fresh, clean air and taste that soft Scottish water. Hannah in Cooper says, you know you're in Scotland when the cows are ginger. Erin in Garbridge, you know you're in Scotland when you smell hops and malted barley coming from a distillery or brewery. And finally, Jane in Manchester, you know you're in Scotland when deep fried Mars bars are available as a snack. And I do happen to know that they're available at Cromars on Market Street. Sadly, we're just about at the end of the evening, but please allow me, on your behalf, to thank all the participants this evening one more time. We heard from the Principal and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dame Sally Mapstone, the Chancellor's Piper, Joelle Miller, students of the Alleycats a cappella group, Ewan Kinnenmonth, Keith McLaren, students of Highland Fusion, Lucy Ribchester, Val McDermott, Emma Montgomery, Bill Zacks, our very own IT services behind the camera, and all the colleagues in the Development Office who have helped put together this evening's programme and kept me watered and fed. Thank you all for joining us this evening. From all of us here at the University of St Andrews, happy Burns Night on the 25th of January, and haste you back.
Acquaintance be forgot and
days of Auld Lang Syne. For Auld Lang Syne, my dear, for Auld Lang Syne. We'll take a cup of kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne. We'll take a cup of kindness yet for